History of a Teacher by Famous Fault. Chapter 14. Inhabitants of the Black Lake. Rebecca wasn't too surprised to learn that Yugi had been in the Hog's Head. The two of them had coffee together in Yugi's room Sunday afternoon. They hadn't small-talked like they usually did, but had directly moved on to more serious conversations. So, the meeting in the Hog's Head went pretty well, Yugi said with a smile. When are you all going to meet? How did you know? Rebecca had asked and dipped her gingerbread in her coffee, something she had always enjoyed. I was there. I was present at the entire meeting. I have to thank you for helping Tracy, Yugi said, still with a smile that made Rebecca understand that Yugi was quite satisfied with what he had done, though for some reason it didn't seem entirely genuine. No problem. It was a good idea, Rebecca said, dismissing. Are you all right? I'm fine, Yugi said automatically, but stopped dead when he saw Rebecca's expression. What? Yugi, she said with a raised eyebrow. Everyone else might fall for that, but I know you too well to be tricked. What's wrong? Rebecca meant well. Atem knew that, and so did Yugi, but Yugi was tired, stressed, and sad. He lost his temper. What do you know? He burst out unexpectedly. It's been 4 years since you and I saw each other before everything went to hell. Even before that, what did you know anyway? Atem couldn't believe his ears. He had known that Yugi's previously non-existent temper had developed during the years while he was hunting a faceless killer, but for Yugi to take it out on Rebecca, it was not something that Atem could comprehend. But people changed, didn't they? Then he realized that the reason Yugi was so on edge was him. His lighter was worried sick about him. The once nameless pharaoh who suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder due to events from the Second World War. To Atem, that sounded more like a bad joke than an awful reality. He didn't notice his PTSD, but perhaps that was the reason that Yugi was so worried. Rebecca and Yugi were both oblivious to the spirit's pondering, and Yugi, who with a surge of shame realized what he had just said, was about to apologize. It was just that Rebecca wasn't the easiest person to apologize to. She was simply too quick for that. What I knew? She wondered quietly. A dangerous tone colored her voice. It was a tone Atem had experienced before, but Yugi was taken aback by it. I accused your grandfather of a horrible crime the first time I met you. I was disrespectful towards my opponents and my guards. The only thing you do is forfeit the duel. Rebecca's voice was steadily getting more angry and louder. You forfeit! Did you actually think I'd get that? Of course I didn't. We're not all as kind-hearted as you once were, and I believe you still are. I didn't get that you wanted to teach me that there were more important things than winning. I was a complete stranger at the time, yet you did. From that moment, I knew who you were. It was incredible that Rebecca could carry on the preaching without having to breathe more than once every 4 sentences, but she did. You were the kindest, honest, trustworthy, patient, and probably the most foolish person I have ever met. Did you think my opinion of you changed during Dart's time? No, it didn't. If anything, you confirmed it. You were the most foolish and saint-like person I've ever met. You were bothered by everything that is in the least unfair, and it takes an hour for someone to learn how to recognize when something is wrong with you or that freaky spirit you share a body with. The only reason people here don't learn to recognize it is because they don't see it the way I did, the way we did. It was hard to tell who was more surprised, Yugi or Atem. Atem wasn't very pleased over being called a freaky spirit, though he assumed that Rebecca meant nothing by it. Yugi was shocked overall by what Rebecca had just thrown in his face, and was completely stunned. Who's we? Yugi asked eventually. Do I have to name them? Rebecca wondered. There were many people who saw you the way I do, who could read you as good as I can, and way better. So what's wrong? I'm just worried. Something bad happened, something that shouldn't have happened, and I don't know what to do about it, he confessed, deciding that there was no point in continuing the fight. That didn't tell Rebecca anything at all, but instead of commenting that, she decided to guess. Has it something to do with why the teachers are avoiding you? And perhaps with what you did to Umbridge? Yes and no, Yugi said. Certainly the teachers were wary when they heard about Umbridge, but it isn't the reason that they avoid me. Did you hear about what happened last Thursday? Rebecca had to think for a while. I'm not sure. Marietta was telling some younger Ravenclaws how weird the Slytherins had been acting the final class that day. Parvati had been escorted to the class by Dean, and she had panicked as soon as she saw Padma and kept asking her if she was all right. Many of the Slytherins had been in shock. Tracy Davis didn't attend any class the day after, and Daphne Greengrass, Draco Malfoy, and Theodore Knott were sent away by Professor Flitwick since they were in no condition to learn anything. But that's just what I heard, though. Do you know anything about it?
Yugi nodded. I do. They are all suffering from PTSD.
That confused Rebecca. But how? What happened?
Let me, Yugi. It was my fault, so I should explain, Atem said quietly.
But
I'm fine, Yugi. I can do this,
the ancient spirit interrupted. Yugi didn't protest further, but retreated to his soul room, leaving Atem to take control. Atem? Rebecca wondered with a frown.
It was my fault. I was afraid that some students would sympathize with the Nazi. They did, in the beginning. I changed that, but not completely as intended, though. Yugi was teaching them about the concentration and extermination camps, and I wanted them to understand the true horrors of what happened. I reached out with the shadows. I aimed for them to feel the same hopelessness as the actual prisoners had. Only for a second, so they understood, nothing more. I wasn't prepared for the illusions the shadows started to show us, me and the class. I was so taken aback by the horror, fear, and death which I saw that I was caught up in the shadows to such an extent that I couldn't release myself from them and take them back. The students lived what happened in the concentration and extermination camps. They don't remember it, but do at the same time. It's an unconscious knowledge. Post-traumatic stress disorder was the result. Nightmares, survivor's guilt, fear, anger. And I can't make it undone. I devastated everything they knew, and within an hour, they were war survivors. They know how it feels, how to die. I couldn't have put them through something worse.
Rebecca was just gaping. There was a long silence before she finally spoke. Yugi, too?
Atem shook his head. No, I avoided Yugi, so he wasn't affected. Only the students and me. The students, since I was aiming for them. Me, because I was controlling the shadows.
So that's what Parvati meant yesterday, Rebecca sighed, still not having entirely realized what Atem had just told her. Are you all right?
I don't know. I feel more powerless than ever. I feel like I should have done something, but I couldn't. I feel guilty and ashamed. I'm worried about the students. I don't know what is happening to them. Will they ever recover, or will they forever be haunted by nightmares and sudden panic attacks? I've lost myself, Rebecca, again, and I don't know if I'll be able to become me again this time, too.
I'll help you, just like last time, Yugi told the pharaoh.
Thank you,
was all the pharaoh could say. Atem wouldn't tell Yugi that he needed just as much help as the spirit did himself. Yugi had become a lot more like himself since their arrival at Hogwarts, a lot due to Rebecca, but Yugi was still far from the light that he once was, and Atem knew that they had now reached a stalemate. Someone from outside had to help one of the two now to get them out of their spiral, a spiral that just a week ago had been going upwards, but now steadily downwards, and Atem was quite sure that Rebecca wouldn't be able to turn it around. Rebecca knew that too. She was thinking about what Anzu had told her while Atem had been in Death Valley. The strength of the odd group of persons she had gotten to know lied in their friendship. They had all been a vital part. You could have seen them as rings. The inner ring was Honda, Jinurchi, Anzu, Yugi, and the Pharaoh, the 5 closest friends anyone could think of. The second ring would consist of Ryo, Otogi, Mai, Mokuba, and Kaiba. She was part of the third ring, together with Merrick, Ishizu, Rashid, and her grandfather. It wasn't surprising that Atem and Yugi were doing poorly. Many of the people they had cared about most were gone. It just occurred to me that I have something to do, she said, and jumped up. She threw the astonished spirit that was clearly controlling her friend's body a look and sighed. I understand why you did it. I'm not mad. If anything, I'm worried. This will make things more complicated than they already were, but I assume you know that. As I said, I really do have something to attend to. She sighed again and looked at him, thoughtful a while. Then she shook her head a little. Take care, both of you. She walked towards the door and then let herself out. Atem was still sitting on the chair.
PTSD. What a joke. Everything is just a stupid joke.
He put his head on the table and closed his eyes. The images that met him were the proof of that it was everything but a joke. It was very real. Rebecca could handle these kind of things well. She wasn't as shocked as Yugi had been. While walking towards the west tower in which the Ravenclaw common room was located, she was going over several possibilities and solutions. She was, after all, a true Ravenclaw. The common room was filled with silent students. More than half of them were fifth years doing their homework. Rebecca pitied the fifth years and their amount of homework and wasn't looking forward to the next year. She had hard enough to catch up with her studies as it was. She was still busy on first year material in most classes, though the teachers did a great effort to help her catch up. Professor Flitwick had assured her that she would be able to delay her owls at least 2 more years if she wanted, since she was a so-called late student. She shook her head. She was more distracted than usual, but that was mostly due to all the information she had received at once. For some reason, she was starting to miss her computer. It had been an unwavering source of logic that she always could rely on. It wasn't until she was disturbing the silence by searching the bookcases for blank parchment that she realized that it was a sad thought and a slightly disturbing one. What kind of person fled to her computer when her world was changing faster than she could keep up with? Finally, she found a piece of parchment that would fulfill its purpose, and to many of the other Ravenclaw's relief, she left the common room. The weather outside was rainy, but for once, Rebecca chose to ignore the rain and use the opportunity to go to the lake. The lake was an interesting place. The creatures in it seemed to have taken some kind of liking to her, especially the giant squid that lived in it. Every time she was by the lake alone, a giant tentacle would reach out to her. The first time, it had freaked her out immensely, but when she asked Peter about it, he had assured her that the squid in the lake was the most harmless creature that inhabited the Black Lake, and that he was very friendly. Rebecca hadn't asked what else inhabited the lake. This time, the squid came faster than usual. A dark shadow formed beneath the surface, and a huge red tentacle came from the deep and touched her surprisingly lightly on her cheek. She smiled and tickled it softly. Some bubbles appeared on the surface of the inky water, and Rebecca knew that it was a sign of the squid's approval. "I'm going to write a letter," she told the black surface, as usual, unsure whether the squid could hear or understand her. "A friend of mine needs help from someone who knows him. I'd help him, but I'm simply not close enough to him. I know someone who is, though. That person doesn't know about this world, but Yugi and the Pharaoh need help, don't they? I don't like to see the two of them suffer that much. They have suffered enough, and yet it's constantly getting worse. There is only one person that can change that, someone who has fought at their side before." Rebecca dipped her quill in the ink she had taken with her and started to curse the rain, which made writing a lot harder. "Rio," she started, and suddenly the parchment was ripped from her hands by a tentacle that wasn't red, but nearly brown. Rebecca gave a short scream of surprise. "Hey!" Then a being Rebecca recognized crossed the surface, and all Rebecca could do was stare. This wasn't good. Not good at all. A brown squid with large yellow eyes was glaring at her in a way that wasn't nearly as friendly as the way the giant squid treated the students. Above his eyes, he had eyebrows that literally consisted of a fire, a large fire that met between the creature's eyes and went upwards over his head in a way that made it look like a hairdo, a large, hot, orange hairdo. His tentacles were flaming on certain places. Every now and then, a flame on a tentacle would extinguish, and a different one would awaken somewhere else. The brown skin wasn't smooth, but wrinkled, making the creature look very old. Rebecca was certain that Pegasus had named this creature Firekraken. A common monster, not weak, and not strong. The kind that you used for sacrifices, since it wasn't strong enough to last in battle. You had 1,000 of these monsters in the game, but for some reason it looked a lot more powerful now it was swimming before her. He was at least 4 times taller than her. At least. "Don't write," the Kraken commanded. "I won't allow it." Rebecca was still too much herself not to protest despite the size of the creature in front of her. "But why? Yugi and the Pharaoh need help." "There is no point in asking the tomb robber for help," the ancient being of fire in front of her said. That comment made Rebecca flare up in anger. "Tomb robber? Tomb robber? How dare you!" Her voice shifted 2 octaves, but she didn't care. "Rio should never be compared to that pathetic excuse of a thief." "Have you ever met the tomb robber?" the Kraken went on, ignoring her anger. "No," Rebecca said sourly, "but I have met Rio." "If you don't know the tomb robber, then how do you know that the two shouldn't be compared? The tomb robber might have been the petty servant of a demon that took control over his body, memory, and will. But do you know what he was like before?" The Kraken talked very slowly, as if he had all the time in the world. Rebecca was slightly worried about what would happen if anyone would see the giant being. Everyone would realize that it wasn't the giant squid, mostly since the giant squid wasn't able to defy the laws of physics by burning underwater. No? Rebecca said more sourly.
Bakura was a child like any other until the pharaoh had his village slaughtered. Little Bakura grew up overnight. How shocked he was to see his family and friends be sacrificed, alive to form such a dark power. Akhenaten defied the eons-old demon Zork, but that demon soon came in contact with the little albino boy, filling the boy's heart with so much anger and hatred that he was able to create a Ka that was only matched by the Egyptian gods. Little Bakura had little to say in the matter. He wanted revenge, and Zork could easily promise him that. Soon Bakura had a contract with the devil, and he was beyond our rescue. When Zork needed a sacrifice, he took Bagheera. He didn't care much. The Millennium items caused nothing but destruction. It destroyed the life of a little boy, but instead of destroying them, the greedy pharaoh kept them to himself and decided to live forever.
The Kraken turned away, as if he had nothing left to say, but Rebecca disagreed on that. She picked up a rock and threw it as hard as she could, hitting the shadow creature full in the head. It turned around, merely annoyed by a hit that could have killed a person. Bastard! Rebecca screamed at the top of her lungs and only vaguely noticed that it started to drain harder. The pharaoh sacrificed his life and the suffering that came with the shadows. He did intend to destroy them, for crying out loud. He really did. Someone else took away that possibility from him. That person killed his friends and closed the door to the afterlife, stopping the ritual that would have destroyed the Millennium items. She took a deep breath. Since when are the shadow creatures able to act without being called upon anyway? You are prisoners in stone. The only ones able to do so are the creatures that dwell in the dominion of the beast. Don't talk ill about someone you don't know. I know I made a mistake in doing so myself. I admit that. But I am human, and humans make mistakes.
You live up to your rumor. It is said that it's hard to argue with you. You're a fool, and a fool will drag you down to a level and beat you with experience. Let's both keep quiet about people we don't really know.
Rebecca was just gaping at the overly obvious insult and was considering jinxing the Kraken, but decided that wouldn't be smart.
As for me acting without being commanded to do anything, every girl that was ever trapped in the shadows is able to act of their own free will whenever they want. It only takes a lot of energy, so we choose not to. When a wielder commands us to do something, we are aided by raw shadows, which give us enough energy to do as we were told, and usually we are stopped by the wielder if we try to exit the shadows. A couple of days ago, his grip faltered though, and I left. Not many of us talk either, since that takes even more energy. It's why we speak so slowly, you see. The creatures in the dominion of the beast don't have that problem. They have never been captured by the shadows.
The Kraken sounded bitter, and Rebecca raised an eyebrow.
So many of these foolish creatures are so loyal to their first person that treats them with the least of respect. It's pathetic. I don't know what they see in their masters. We are slaves. They should realize that. No human ever treats us with respect.
Rebecca was steadily getting more annoyed, but somewhere in the back of her head she could see the undeniably funny situation. A teenage girl was standing visibly annoyed in front of an enormous burning squid that was complaining about absolutely everything. Yugi does! He always has! I once didn't, but I sure do now! It was a lesson I learned rather quickly. Same for that pharaoh! The only one here who sees you as slaves is you! She raised her hands in an angry and annoyed gesture. I'm starting to wonder who the fool is here. The Kraken ignored her once again.
I'll soon have to return to the shadows. I'm growing weak, so I'll make my point.
Finally, Rebecca muttered under her breath and received a very unfriendly glare from the brown squid.
Momentarily, there is no person closer to Yugi than you are. There is no point in asking this Rio to help. Rio doesn't know about the wizarding world, and you don't have the authorization to tell him, remember? You are the only person that Yugi and the Pharaoh can turn to in times like you're still the 10-year-old that they have to protect, although you proved already then that you have no need for protection. They will trouble you with their problems, although they should. Still, since you are closest to the pair of them, it will be you that will teach them a very valuable lesson that will most definitely break the spiral they are in.
It had taken the Kraken quite some time to say all that, and Rebecca had time to think over it several times before he had even finished.
Now I'm going.
Wait! Rebecca yelled. Why are you telling me this?
To prepare you,
The Kraken answered and disappeared in the deep. Prepare me for what? She whispered at the unusual blank surface of the black lake. A red tentacle shot out of the lake and wrapped itself gently around her in comfort as Rebecca looked around. She finally noticed the thunderclouds that were gathering at the skyline and knew she had to be grateful. Hadn't it been for them, she had probably had an audience which would have asked more questions than she would have answered. Harry and Ron had left the castle to work outside with their homework rather early, when the last burst of autumn sun was still shining. When it started to drizzle, they had ignored it, knowing that if they went inside, they wouldn't have the energy or the desire to continue with what they were doing. They had been busy quite a while when Ron poked Harry in the side. Look, the redhead said, is a giant squid. Harry looked up, and indeed, one of the red tentacles of the giant squid had broken the surface of the black lake and reached out to a figure that Harry vaguely could make out as Rebecca Hawkins. He just watched, interested. Friend George said that Squid likes it when you tickle him. Ron said. Great bubbles erupted on the surface, and they could hear Rebecca talk, though they couldn't hear what she said. The squid withdrew, and Rebecca started writing something. She had barely started before a different tentacle shot into the water, taking something from Rebecca. How many of the squid's tentacles burn? Harry asked Ron, as the two of them were watching, wide-eyed. According to Friend George, none, Ron said with a squeaky voice. It had the same tone as when Hagrid had sent them to see Aragog, Hagrid's enormous pet spider. The very unfriendly pet spider that had presented them to his children as dinner. The two boys heard a scream from the other side of the lake. It didn't sound scared, just affronted. Hey! Then a being crossed the surface, and Harry didn't need Ron to know that the squid facing Rebecca wasn't the huge but friendly being that normally inhabited the lake. This squid was burning, both above and underneath the water.
Don't try it. I won't allow it.
It took Harry and Ron a while to understand that the slow yet loud voice came from the burning creature. What surprised them even more was that Rebecca simply stood up and answered it. Not the tiniest bit of fear in her voice. But why? Yugi and the Pharaoh need help! Ron looked at Harry, and Harry nodded. Why wasn't Hermione with them every time something like this happened? Why would... Ron started, but Harry silenced him. Listen first, question later.
There is no point in asking the tomb robber for help,
the ancient being of fire said. Rebecca's voice was loud enough for them to hear without effort now, and the anger that filled her voice made Harry wonder whether Ron feared the squib or the Ravenclaw. Tomb robber! How dare you! We should never be compared to that pathetic excuse of a thief!
Have you ever met the tomb robber?
The squib went on, ignoring her anger and oblivious to his audience. No, Rebecca said sourly, but I have met Rio. Her voice had become lower, and Harry and Ron both held their breath so they wouldn't miss a word.
If you don't know the tomb robber, then how do you know that the door shouldn't be compared? The tomb robber might have been the petty servant of a demon that took control over his body, memory, and will. But do you know what he was like before?
The Kraken talked very slowly. It sounded like he was constantly falling asleep. Ron frowned. Didn't Hermione say something about a tomb robber? Ron wondered. Harry gave Ron an annoyed glance and put a hand over his friend's mouth, but nodded. Ron had talked through Rebecca's answer, and Harry assumed that it had been a no, for once again the booming but slow voice echoed over the lake.
Bakura was a child like any other, until the Pharaoh had his village slaughtered. Little Bakura grew up overnight. How shocked he was to see his family and friends being sacrificed alive to form such a dark power. Akhenaten defied the eons old demon Zork, but that demon soon came in contact with a little albino boy, filling the boy's heart with so much anger and hatred that he was able to create a car that was only matched by the Egyptian gods. Little Bakura had little to say in the matter. He wanted revenge, and so could easily promise him that
Ron and Harry just stared at each other, horrified. Neither of the two knew what to think. The flaming squid turned away from the blonde girl, but the blonde girl was full of surprises. Harry became pale as she lifted her back and threw it with more strength than Harry could have held for possible. Rebecca wasn't done with surprising the two Gryffindors, though. Bastard! Rebecca screamed at the top of her lungs. The Pharaoh sacrificed his life to end the suffering that came with the shadows. He did intend to destroy them, for crying out loud. He really did. Someone else took away that possibility from him. That person killed his friends and closed the door to the afterlife, stopping the ritual that would have destroyed the Millennium items. She took a deep breath. Since we're not the shadow creatures able to act without being called upon anyway, you are prisoners in stone. The only ones able to do so are the creatures that dwell in the dominion of the beast. Don't talk ill about someone you don't know. I know I made a mistake in doing so myself, I admit that. But I am human, and humans make mistakes. Shing. Ron stammered and had his finger lifted towards Rebecca. I's going to kill her. Ron, shut up, Harry said, having completely lost patience with his friend.
You live up to your rumor. It is said that it's hard to argue with you. You're a fool, and a fool will drag you down to a level and beat you with experience. Let's both keep quiet about people we don't really know.
Haven't you two heard more than you should have already? A woman's voice asked from behind them. Go back inside and forget what you heard. Harry and Ron turned around quickly. Behind them stood a witch with black robes and purple hair with brown feathers in it. Her black robes had a neckline that consisted of silver, and in the silver was an eye. It was definitely not a human eye. It was larger, brown, and the iris was purple. It reminded Harry a bit of Moody's eye, but he soon noticed that the witch behind them was far from human. In her forehead was the third eye, a green one, that closed and opened in the same way a crocodile's eye did. Who are you? Harry asked, on the verge of panic. I'm the Witch of the Black Forest, a shadow creature loyal to Rebecca. I'm not going to allow you to interfere in what is supposed to happen. Me and my kin should have been destroyed together with the power of the shadows several years ago, and now we seek a way to destroy them once again. Firecracken over there may not have all the facts right, since he has never been called upon in any shadow game, but he is surprisingly tolerant up to the outside world. We cannot have you sneak around. The fewer people know about these powers, the better. If they were to fall into the wrong hands, there is no guarantee that the Pharaoh could beat them once again. What the Egyptian gods had prophesied has already happened, and the shadows should have been gone. A new prophecy has been made. You heard it, but do not try to understand. The wizarding world and the shadows should have stayed away from each other. These two powers combined can lead to nothing but destruction. Go inside and keep your mouth closed, or the beings of shadows will have no choice but to silence you forever. The Cursebreakers didn't listen to our warnings. Take heed, or you'll meet the same fate. But why would you want to be destroyed? Don't you want to live? Harry wondered, confused. I was a part of a person's soul a long time ago. 5,000 years have passed since Akhenaten accused the woman who I served of witchcraft and absorbed me. With me, all her power disappeared, so they released her, but she couldn't speak ever again, and she avoided human contact. It was sad, but I could not help her. I was trapped in a great tablet of stone that was kept in a sanctuary. On occasion, Akhenaten would call upon me and told me to do things for him, spy mostly. I didn't live anymore since I had been ripped from my home and was a prisoner of the shadows. Akhenaten had little respect for me or any other of his monsters. During my tasks, I saw what the shadows were doing to Egypt. I fought in the battle against Zork the first time. We all knew that it couldn't be won, but it was okay, because all beasts knew about the Egyptian gods and what they had foreseen. A long time went while I was just waiting for the return of the brave pharaoh who had made the greatest of sacrifices, denying himself the passage to the afterlife, and for that he was rewarded by Obelisk, Slifer, and Ra. They gave him the chance to change the past, destroy the Millennium items, and leave for the afterlife once he would return. And the pharaoh returned, and with the shadows and the awful games. Every shadow creature turned its eyes on him and waited to be summoned. I was summoned by Rebecca, a little girl at the time, who was completely unable to wield the shadows. I was surprised, but then I saw that her opponent was no less but the pharaoh's Hikari, and I understood.
What surprised me more was how gentle and respectful the Hikari was towards the creatures he summoned, even though he didn't know that we were more than simulations. Rebecca wasn't as nice. She was very rude toward those she summoned and the Hikari. The Hikari did something that I couldn't get. He forfeited the duel so Rebecca would learn that there was a heart in the game, and that we'd aid those who treated us with respect. Ever since that day, Rebecca has been treating me and her other monsters with all the respect she can manage. She's a good master, and I swore that I'd protect her. If the shadows aren't destroyed, she and many others will come in lethal danger. I'd rather have the shadows and thus myself obliterated than this world in pieces. I know that there are monsters that live in the Dominion that will help her if needed." The woman smiled. "Now I've told you a lot more than you should know. We are trying to keep people who are free from the shadows, like Rio, out of it, and prevent new people from coming in. Now you already know, and that can't be changed. But I've warned you." With that, the witch faded away in shadows that soon became thinner, almost like smoke. The two of them sat absolutely silent. Rebecca had gone inside, and thunder could be heard coming closer. They were soaking wet, but absolutely didn't care. "What was that?" Ron asked, more to himself than anyone else. "A Ka," Harry said, and recalled the laws of Ka and Ba that Professor Muto had explained to them. "What's Hikari?" "I don't know, Harry, but I'm scared," Ron admitted. "I'm very scared." "It's okay, Ron," Harry said and patted his friend on the back. "I actually do believe that Professor Muto is on our side, despite what everyone else thinks. I'm more worried about what happened if Voldemort ever got his hands on the shadows, since I believe that our magic is nothing compared to the darkness this pharaoh wields."